Mr Kerr.
Deputy Presiding Officer, pleasure to follow Rachel Hamilton, who I think has given an excellent speech. And I thank Willie Rennie for his motion. And I'd also like to agree wholeheartedly with the speech delivered by Michelle Thompson. And I'd like to continue in the same vein, because last week I, with many others, I'm sure, attended a public consultation for the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme. And listening to the experts and the local community, the message was crystal clear. The Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme isn't just an optional project, it's a lifeline. And the total cost at current prices of this project is £672 million. And as Michelle Thompson said, Falkirk Council is required by legislation to fund 20% of that total. And it's just not realistic. Falkirk Council cannot afford £134 million that the government, that the legislation expects them to stump up for the scheme. Now, this is the same Falkirk Council, by the way, that is so underfunded by the Scottish Government that they just had to tap into over £20 million of reserves just to keep the lights on. And members will know that I am not the greatest fan of the SNP Falkirk Council, but on this issue they are in an impossible predicament. The SNP Scottish Government must confront the reality staring them in the face, because Grangemouth must be a national priority. It is a lifeblood of our nation, generating 4% of our country's GDP, responsible for 8% of all Scottish manufacturing, 30% of all of our exports move through the port at Grangemouth. So the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme would save at least £2 billion. The economic impact assessments on this probably need to be kept live, but it's at least £2 billion in damages, including, as was mentioned by Michelle Thompson, at least 2,000 residential properties. And I thought one of the most compelling aspects of Willie Rennie's speech tonight was the human dimension of all of this, as we have seen at Brechin, in particular, as a result of Storm Babette. Now, let me just say, I cannot think that it would be possible for us to leave Grangemouth in this vulnerable position, in the hands and in the finances of a local authority teetering, as I think it is, on the edge of bankruptcy. Now, Tess White mentioned Brechin and Babette. I've just mentioned it. And I think, unfortunately, the Scottish Government does not have a good record of responding to crises such as those that occurred in Brechin last October. And I would specifically draw attention to one quote from a Freedom of Information request I obtained that showed that the Chief Executive of Angus Council wrote to the Scottish Government on the 31st of October saying, and I quote, "It is concerning, almost 2 weeks on, that no officer in the Scottish Government has contacted myself to ask how we are coping as a council, or discuss how the Scottish Government can lean into the recovery phase of Storm Babette." Now, Deputy Presiding Officer, this is simply not acceptable. Why, when the urgency of a situation is so clear, why did it take the Scottish Government so long to respond? That's in the same vein as the questions I think Willie Rennie was rightly asking. If I may borrow from Winston Churchill, I think these are situations that require action this day. There's something that this government needs to improve its performance in respect of action and delivery. So let me conclude with 4 questions, if I may, Deputy Presiding Officer. In light of the financial straitjacket Falkirk Council is forced to live with, what further financial commitment is the Scottish Government prepared to make to support Falkirk Council to move the flood prevention project forward? And my second question is, what economic impact assessments has the Minister received or commissioned in the event of a catastrophic event at Grangemouth involving the port, the industrial complex and the communities affected? My next question is, does the Minister agree with the figure that Falkirk Council have produced in their assessment of the economic impact of such a catastrophe as being at least £2.4 billion? And I think that's an important number because it puts the level of the investment required for this scheme into the context of what happens if we don't make this investment. And my last question, which I hope the Minister will take the opportunity to respond to, is what discussions has she had with UK ministers about the Grangemouth Flood Protection Scheme, specifically given the strategic economic importance of the port and the industrial complex. And I conclude by saying that the slow response we saw in Babette is not good enough. This cannot be a slow unravelling, because the consequences of inaction hurts communities, hurts people, hurts our economy, but above all, hurts our people. And so will the Minister please see a step change in response to this impending crisis?
Thank you, Mr.